title of tonight's message. He rewards those who seek him. But first, remember that Potiphar's wife, she feels like it's time to take her friendship with Joseph to the next level. There should be no reason why Joseph would hesitate to do this except that she's a married woman. She's married to Joseph's master, Potiphar. This is Potiphar's wife, the wife of his master. All of us understand, you see, that moving in on somebody else's relationship is not a good thing, right? It's not okay, right? We understand that? Our reason for not doing that is because it's a sin against the other person in the relationship, isn't it? I would never do that, you might say. I would never break up a marriage, you might say, in order to please myself. I certainly hope you never do, but it's harder to do than you think. Because like with any sin, what's right and true becomes obscured by what we want. The more we're exposed to ideas and images and opportunities that are, one, attractive, and two, not right and true, the more what is true and what is right fades into the background. And then what's wrong seems not so bad. So the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife isn't telling us that Joseph had no desire to have a closer relationship with her. That's not what it's telling us. It's not saying anything about that. And it's one reason is because it just doesn't matter. Joseph might have been in love with her. It doesn't matter. The story is telling us that regardless of what earthly things Joseph wanted, Joseph had a commitment to greater things, eternal things, that he desired more than getting what he wanted. See, this is in contrast to us. So according to the Bible, on our own, we simply want what's wicked and wrong at all times. See, the story of Joseph is here to teach us that only love for God, only love for the truth, and only love for what's right guards us against sin. See, only loving what's right and what's true will bring about the strength to turn away from temptation. Only loving what's right and true will give us the strength to flee sexual immorality when attractive opportunities come up for us, and they do. Love for God must replace desire for sin. Otherwise, we'll sin, or we'll put one sin in front of another. We'll just say, oh, I'm done with that sin, and I'm going to go and do this other sin. If you want to have a commitment to not sin, it must flow out of a desire for God. Not sin must come out of a desire for God. So that's what Joseph's refusal was really saying. Yes, it would be wrong to move in on his boss's wife. It would have been totally wrong, even though she was young like he was, even though they've spent the last 13 years together becoming close friends. Even though Joseph is lonely, he'd love to have a romantic relationship. He deserved to have a romantic relationship. This is an awesome opportunity for him as far as opportunities go. But it would be wrong for one, and it would be an insult against God, because so far God has proven to Joseph that he is with him. God is with him. And God has proven that he's providing for all his needs. And on top of that, God's even made him to be an equal in the house of a wealthy and influential man, Potiphar, who is his master. Because of Joseph's love for God, he's able to recognize, even though this would be a sin against Potiphar, and it would jeopardize Potiphar's marriage, the real sin and the real wickedness here would primarily be against God. To take romantic matters into his own hands would mean he would have to cast aside God's purpose for him. And in the midst of doing so, he'd lose, this is the big part, he'd lose sight of God. Now, I promise you that Joseph didn't refuse Potiphar's wife mainly because of all the good things in his life that he would lose. It might have been a deterrent, but it wasn't the main deterrent, because there's probably a good chance that he and Potiphar's wife would have had intentions to keep this thing secret, like we all do, don't we? They might have succeeded. Well, regardless of what he would have lost or gained, regardless if he'd get caught or not, Joseph wouldn't do it. Joseph himself said it'd be wickedness and a sin against God. That's revealing that Joseph was mainly concerned about the things of God. So usually when we think about doing right things instead of wrong things, we think of what it would mean for other people. We don't want to hurt people's feelings. We don't want people to be angry with us. We don't want people to be disappointed with us. That's why we'll do the right thing instead of the wrong thing. This is a reason, isn't it? I don't want somebody to be angry with me. Another reason why we might do the right thing and not do the wrong thing is because we just don't want to get caught. We don't want to be embarrassed if we were to get caught. But how often do we do the right thing because we don't want to lose sight of the face of God in our hearts and in our lives? How often is that our real motive? Let me tell you something. The only time that it counts to do the right thing instead of the wrong thing is when you're doing right in order to see God. Our righteousness, the things that we try to do right, our righteousness is like filthy rags, God says in Isaiah. Everything we do right is still filth compared to God. But if we do right instead of wrong, in order to see God and keep seeing God, then what we get for looking to God that way is God. Hebrews 11:6. It is impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. See, that's the true testimony of Joseph's story. God is the center of Joseph's desires. The reason Joseph does anything is God. He would not sin against Potiphar. He wouldn't do it. The reward from God is what Joseph is after. He'll do whatever he's got to do to get it. He'll run away from everything that would obscure it, and that's exactly the way it should be. Now, my goal in talking to you guys about Joseph and Potiphar's wife last week was to get you guys to stop fooling around with other people, from stealing the things from God that he intends to gladly and freely give you in marriage. That's what I wanted you to take away from last week's story. But the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys and to ask you guys to quit misusing sexuality is because pursuing sexual expression outside of God's design, outside of marriage, makes it impossible for you to see God. You will be blind to God and the things of God as long as what you want is sin. Here's the tragedy. Here's the real tragedy, is that you'll be totally okay with that, right? Absolutely unaware of what you're really doing. Seeing God is the issue. Losing sight of God is the problem. Without a miracle of God in our hearts, we eagerly look everywhere else, anything except God. But in the story and person of Joseph, we get to see the whole spectrum of what living life, loving God really means, and what it will always look like if you were to do it and if I were to do it. What would it look like if you were to really live like you loved God? What would it look like if I really lived loving God? The story of Joseph tells us this story is a view into spiritual realities that you can't see. And this story exists to reveal them to our hearts. The story exists to reveal them to our hearts as real and true, even though they're invisible. They're invisible. But reality shows up in real ways, even obvious ways. And we'll never see them if we're blind. But that doesn't mean that reality isn't there. Try describing to your ear what you see. Try describing to your eyes what you hear. It'd be a ridiculous argument for your ear to say, well, there's no such thing as sight because I can't hear it. So these realities exist. They're just hidden to you if you're blind. Now, the story of Joseph is an opportunity, guys, for us to see hidden realities. Realities hidden in the truth of God and revealed as bright and true in our hearts through faith. Tonight, we're going to take just a few minutes to explore and identify this hidden reality in God. I want us to see this great reward that God has for those who seek him. So, if you treat every job and every boss in such a way that you're actually serving God and that you love to serve God, keep in mind the issue is he rewards those who seek him. That's the title. You do this, seek God in your job. Treat your job like you're actually serving God. Treat your boss like you're actually serving God. Everything in your life will go perfect, right? What do you guys think? No? You'd think that a good life would be a good reward for loving God and serving God, right? Would that make sense logically? If love for God keeps you from falling into temptation like Joseph, and you always do the right thing and you never do the wrong thing, then everything in your life will be awesome, right? It's logically, you'd think it makes sense that way. As a reward for doing good things, we're talking about a reward here, guys. God rewards those who seek him, right? Rewards. You think that as a reward for doing good things rather than evil things, your life would go right. You guys are saying no, some of you, but I think somewhere down deep we feel like, yeah. But don't say yes or no just yet, because it's both, depending on your point of view. See, what is the definition of things going right? What is the definition of everything's awesome? Let's see what the story of Joseph has to say about it. Remember that Joseph has just refused to take his relationship with Potiphar's wife to the next level, which is what she wants. He's committed himself to totally avoiding her from now on if he can. We're going to read from Genesis 39, verses 11 through 23. But one day, when Joseph, went into the house to do his work, and none of the men in the house were there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, He has brought among us a Hebrew. Who's he? Potiphar has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until his master came home. And she told him the story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came into me and laughed at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me. Potiphar's anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Now, Joseph did the right thing, didn't he? He wouldn't take the opportunity to be romantically involved with Potiphar's wife. And she caught him alone and tried to take advantage of him, and he literally fled. Say they wore robes in those days, right? She grabbed onto his robe, and he still fled, and he left his robe behind. He's not dressed anymore. Everyone's going to see him streaking around the house. How embarrassing. But he did what he had to do. He got out of there. Remember, 1 Corinthians 6:18 from last week said, flee sexual immorality. Flee sexual immorality. That's what he did. By the way, I got to point out really quick that to avoid Potiphar's wife and to flee when she made an advance is probably something that Joseph had decided to do long before she approached him. He had a plan of action figured out while he was alone so that when temptation came, he knew what to do about it rather than deal with the temptation when it was right in front of him, rather than discuss the matter with her on her terms rather than God's. Because when we're tempted, think about this, guys, when you're tempted to do something sinful, the last thing on our minds is God's terms, isn't it? Well, she caught Joseph in a tempting situation. She had been his friend. Joseph probably cared a great deal for her. It was probably very difficult for him to avoid. He made the decision to avoid her, not even talk to her. It was probably very difficult to avoid her and not listen to her. He didn't want to ignore her. He liked to talk to her. She probably knew just what to say. She was probably even sure to make herself look extra pretty lately. See, she's not an idiot. The woman Folly is not an idiot. She knows how to get what she's after because guys, we're idiots. Guys are idiots. The woman Folly isn't trying to talk us into doing something we don't want to do. She's successfully talking us into something we do want to do that we know we shouldn't do. And how often she succeeds and in how many different ways. When it comes to sin, not just guys, we're all idiots. We are so easily deceived by our own sinfulness. Jeremiah 7:9 says this, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Now, see, I don't think Joseph's decision to flee would have been quite as successful or wouldn't have been so automatic unless he had figured out beforehand that one, he must flee, and two, how to know when to. These decisions need to be made while we're thinking straight. The solution's simple, but it's not easy. I'll give you some examples. If you know someone that makes it easy for you to sin, don't even talk to that person. If stuff on your cell phone makes it easy to sin, leave the cell phone alone. The way you talk to people on your cell phone, the way you talk about people on your cell phone. Leave the cell phone alone. Stuff you're looking at online. Never be alone with him. Never be alone with her if that's what it's going to take. If you find yourself powerless against sin, talk to your parents about it, if you can talk to your parents about it. All of us adult leaders you can talk to about this. All the adults who are here, guys, with you tonight, we care about your battles with temptation and with sin, and we want you to win those battles and not lose your soul. See, Joseph did the right thing. He knew what he had to do ahead of time, and he successfully executed his plan to avoid Potiphar's wife and avoid sinning against God and avoid sinning against Potiphar. See, that's all what we talked about last week. But now this week, everything should have been perfectly fine now because he did that. He did the right thing, albeit a bit uncomfortable. Anytime he sees Potiphar's wife, it's going to be uncomfortable from now on. It should have been fine. But she decides to lie, saying that it was Joseph that had tried to take advantage of her. Please. Come on. Did you hear what she said in the text? Did you hear? First things she does is she insults Potiphar behind his back, claiming that all this time, the reason that Joseph is even there is to make Potiphar's staff and to make Potiphar's family look ridiculous. That was an insult against Potiphar, and I'll tell you why. It was so that when all the other servants start to hear what really happened, and when Potiphar starts to hear what really happened, that these servants start to believe, oh, Potiphar is a bad guy. He's brought Joseph in, this righteous young man, to make us look like idiots. He's a hard worker. He's going to make us all look like idiots. And Potiphar did that on purpose. She's trying to turn their hearts against Potiphar so that when the time comes, they decide with her, regardless of what Potiphar is going to do about Joseph. She says, Joseph tried to rape me. My husband only brought him to make you guys look like fools. On top of all that, she slanders Joseph. See, no one's going to believe this. The men of the house, they knew Joseph. Joseph never treated them any differently than he treated Potiphar. In fact, Joseph may have been the only one that's been holding this whole house together for every one of them. He's the glue. They also know that Potiphar's wife has been after Joseph for quite a while. They see the way she looks at him. They've watched for years how she follows him around. It's inappropriate. She's married. All this nothing about this is new. Joseph's conduct and character, as far as they've all seen, has been spot on, both in the way he is around her and also the way he is around all the other women in the house. When she claims all this about Joseph, oh, he tried to rape me, I bet the whole house groaned like, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, right. And then Potiphar came home. This isn't Potiphar, this is Proximo. But Proximo, I think he kind of looks the way I'd expect Potiphar to look. That's why I'm using Proximo. But anyway, Potiphar gets home, and his anger is kindled. Probably not against Joseph. See, Potiphar knows his wife too. He knows Joseph. He's seen the way she looks at Joseph. And after all this time, why would Joseph still be in charge if Potiphar had any question about Joseph's loyalty to him? He never questioned Joseph's loyalty to him. And most likely he still doesn't. In all likelihood, Potiphar's probably sick of the selfish, childish, insolent, disloyal, scandalous way that his wife has become. And now she's gone and told everyone that Joseph tried to rape her. Oh, great. Oh, great. Yeah, his anger's kindled. Oh, duh. Potiphar knows how good he has it. Joseph is awesome. Joseph is the greatest slave anyone in Egypt ever had. He isn't just a slave. Joseph is actually running this place. All Potiphar has is the title. All he has is the job that makes it so that he's somebody in Egypt. Otherwise, everything is going so well in his life for one reason only, and that's because God is blessing his house for Joseph's sake. In the Bible, we actually read that Potiphar knows, he recognizes that the reason his life is going so well is because Joseph is his main slave. And this woman, what a witch. What a witch. What is she really saying? If she can't have Joseph, then no one can. Is that it? She told everyone, and nobody knows any better except Potiphar and Potiphar's house. Think about what kind of position this puts Potiphar in. What will it look like if he lets Joseph get away with this? What's it going to look like to everybody? Potiphar is going to look like a fool. Keep the slave that raped his wife? Are you kidding? He can't send her away either. What will she say to everyone about him? That Potiphar kept the slave that raped her and got rid of her? That's not going to work. You know, I would bet anything that Joseph and Potiphar had an understanding here. Potiphar could kill Joseph. It was legal. It's been legal throughout all the ages that for doing something like this, Potiphar could actually kill Joseph for trying to rape his wife. The fact that Potiphar didn't kill Joseph tells me that Potiphar didn't believe it. So he sends Joseph to prison instead. I can just see it. Well, Joe, it's come to this. It's just the way it's got to be. Joe. And Joseph, who did nothing wrong, he's dismissed and he's persecuted because of false allegations, false testimony. Sighs and he lowers his head, nods a little bit. Yeah. He gets marched off in shackles and spends the next several years in prison. I'm going to ask again, shouldn't being rewarded for loving God and doing what's right mean that everything will go right? Everything should be awesome, right? What's going on here? What is going on here? If anyone would draw near to God, he must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. Hebrews 11:6. Rewards those who seek him. Are you serious? Is this a joke? Why is Joseph in jail? Potiphar's wife should be in jail. Potiphar should be Joseph's slave, and Joseph should be the captain of the guard. If God is a loving God, then what on earth is going on here? You'd think that all of this should give Joseph a reason to not trust God. That'd seem logical, right? Evidently, God has no sense of justice. If this is what God does for Joseph, then God is not who God says he is. It might seem logical to say that. If God was a good God and a loving God, then Joseph should have all of Potiphar's wealth, and Potiphar and his wife should be in jail. Or maybe Joseph did something wrong long ago, like a sin or something. Maybe he wasn't trusting God quite as much as he should have been, and that's why this is happening to him. Because he failed and sinned in a way which he should have succeeded and not sinned. Do you know that there are pastors, guys, that teach that if you have faith in God, you should never get sick. You'll never be poor. That everything in your life will actually be really, really great. They correctly teach that God wants to reward us, but that any time that we aren't being physically rewarded, it's because we're doing something that keeps God from giving us the good things we want. As if it's all about what we physically want. As if it's all 100% up to us. They teach that if you're sick or if you're poor, it's because you don't have enough faith in God. It's your fault that you're sick, and it's your fault that you're poor, because faith in God will always only make you healthy and wealthy. So if that's true, then Joseph is being dealt this hand either because God is not a good God or because Joseph doesn't have enough faith. But neither of those things are true. Those are teachings that are straight from the pit of hell. They are lies. Our Genesis story tells us what's going on. God was with Joseph, and God showed Joseph steadfast love. What about jail? What about jail? What about all this injustice? Why is Joseph in slavery in the first place? And now he's known all over their town as a rapist, and the Bible calls this steadfast love? Maybe there's something about things going right that we don't really understand. Maybe there's a hidden spiritual reality that Joseph is tuned into that we don't naturally see. Could that be? Did you notice that even in prison, Joseph's commitment was to God? Joseph never was there to serve Potiphar. And Joseph wasn't there to serve the prison. He was there to serve God. And it was up to God where that would be. The circumstances made no difference to Joseph. Now, I'm sure that as far as he was concerned, there was a difference between the king-size feather bed with the garden view on one side and the ocean view on the other. And I'm sure that he would rather have that bed than this stretched canvas cot with the cinder block walls. Anybody would rather have the garden view, ocean view bedroom. And maybe he groaned about, as he looked at that cot. Oh, great. Maybe he missed his feather bed. Maybe. But in terms of how Joseph felt about God, it made no difference. God knows what he's doing. God knows what he's doing. Who is Joseph to say that things aren't going right? Who is Joseph to say that this isn't awesome? God gives. God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So what's the reward? If Joseph is so faithfully seeking God, and all this has landed Joseph in prison, and Joseph even manages to have a good attitude about it all while he's in prison, then where is this reward? There should totally be a reward. After all, Hebrews 11:6, once again, and without faith it is impossible to please God, for whoever would draw near to God must believe he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. It seems like Joseph's done all that. Where's this reward? The story tells us. One sentence, in Genesis 39:21, the reward. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. If you see God and he's awakened you to see the invisible truth, invisible reality all around you that really exists in him, and he's brought you out of darkness and into light, when you have God, you've got it all. When we seek God for the reward he has for his seekers, what reward do we get for seeking God? We get God. Now, if for you being rewarded for seeking God means that you'll get something rather than God, or if it means for you that seeking God means you get something besides God or in addition to God, then you're not seeking God. You're not. If your heart is sad, like the rich young ruler in Mark, if you remember that story, if your heart is sad that the only thing I get for seeking God is God, then you're not seeking God. And you clearly do not see the beautiful and amazing reality that living in his light through Jesus Christ is for your soul. If you seek God, God will give you God. And in God, you have everything you'll ever need or want. Psalm 23:1, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall want for nothing. For Joseph, in light of that awesome spiritual reality, Potiphar's house was nothing. His position in Potiphar's house was nothing. And being a child of Israel himself back in Canaan was nothing. Therefore, losing nice and comfortable things for Joseph was also nothing. And no big deal. Not really a big deal. For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. The things that are seen are transient. They will go away. The things that are unseen are eternal. You could gain the whole world and yet lose your soul, all because you failed to seek the true reward. All because you failed to seek the true treasure that lasts forever and blesses forever, and that's God. God has promised to be a treasure for you. If you hope in him, then all these light and momentary afflictions, these sufferings, these horrible, horrible tragedies and losses are all preparing you for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. And all the bad things that happen today aren't even worth comparing with what true happiness and joy you'll have. How amazingly paradoxical. When God himself reveals himself to you as his true child, and himself as your true father. That can happen even today if your desire is for God according to his will. May he grant that for you. May he grant that for us all. And in the meantime, I'm going to pray for us. Heavenly Father, we're prone to wander. We want what we want. The things of this world are shiny and attractive. Relationships we're not supposed to have outside of marriage, we can get away with it. Nobody questions it. This is what you're supposed to do in high school, right? And we'll look to these things every time instead of looking to you, God, unless you do a miracle in our hearts, unless you shine in our hearts. You who said, let light shine out of darkness, shine in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. Help that to mean something to us. We'll squander this great gift of yours. Relationship gifts, possessions, we'll squander it all. And we'll look to it and to them for satisfaction instead of you unless you help us. I pray, Lord, that for each and everyone here, that would be what tonight is about. Even those of us who've believed it for years, that we would look upon you once again and refresh our souls, refresh our spirits, God. Help us to look at you and be renewed. In Jesus' name, amen.